one of the biggest questions our students face when they're studying demand is how to make the distinction between moving along the demand curve and shifting the entire demand curve. So before we can answer this question, we still have to consider under what scenarios the curve will shift. So an easy way to remember this is PASIFIC. These are all the non-price factors independent of price. And I can sort of imagine you'd be like, wait, what? PASIFIC? What is that? So PASIFIC stands for population, advertising, substitution, income, fashion or taste, interest rate, and complements price. And these factors are the demand shifters, meaning they contribute to the entire shift of the demand. So noting that here, this time I'm using the word demand rather than quantity demanded. I remember last time I briefly mentioned a little bit about the distinction between these two concepts, but let me state it again. So for quantity demanded, I'm talking about a particular point on the curve, for example, like A or D, as you can see here. And for demand, I'm talking about a set of collection of different points, and that's the entire curve. That's the entire demand curve. And again, PASIFIC are the non-price factors that contribute to the entire shift of the demand curve. So first, P stands for population. If there is a greater population, there will be more demand for a certain type of good or service. So in this case, my demand curve will shift towards the right. And this explains why there are so many businesses overseas trying to enter into the Chinese market, because in China, there's a greater population, therefore more opportunities to expand their business and more demand for the type of goods that they sell. And reversely, if the population falls, my demand will shift towards the left. And the second factor, or the demand shifter, is advertising. So advertising, or perhaps more specifically, a successful advertising campaign can encourage more people to consume a certain type of goods. So in this case, a good advertising campaign will shift the entire demand curve to the right, regardless of the price. So we can see that the demand curve in this case will shift from D1 to D2. And on the other hand, if there's a bad news coming out or very unsuccessful advertising occurs, that will then lead to the demand curve shifting towards the left. So as a result, for all the consumers, there will be less willingness to buy certain type of goods. So for example, there was a food safety issue happening several years ago, and I guess it was around 2008, and many dairy companies in China were involved in a crisis regarding the food safety issue. So at that time, many news outlets actually reported about the famous milk companies putting poisonous chemicals into their products. So this is considered bad advertising, even though technically it was not considered an advertising, but we saw less people wanting to buy dairy products during that time because of these news. So as a result of that, the demand for the milk is reduced, and the curve on the diagram will then shift towards the left. So here we want to apply the same logic, and we can analyze how the change in price of a substitute can shift the entire demand of a certain good. So last time we talked about the example between KFC and McDonald's burger. So assuming that we're looking at the demand for McDonald's today, so if the price for KFC increases or KFC becomes more expensive now, and assuming that KFC and McDonald's are substitutes, so what will happen to the demand for McDonald's? Think about it for a second or pause the video. So McDonald's burgers will become more attractive and the demand will shift towards the right. Why? Because if two products are identical or similar, consumers will love whatever is cheaper, right? So for timing purposes, I'll move a little bit faster now, but you can think about in what conditions the demand will shift to the left. So just like substitute, a change in the price of a certain good's complement will also affect the demand for this good. But the effect is instead the opposite. So what do I mean here? So maybe we can think about substitutes in a competitive relationship. So if A is more attractive than B, then the demand for B will go down and the demand curve for B will shift towards the left. So we can see that A and B has a negative relationship, but complements are dependent on one another, but they have a positive relationship. So for example, if the demand for French fries sold by McDonald's goes up, then the demand for ketchup will also goes up. Here we assume that fries is the complement for ketchup because personally I can't eat fries without ketchup, so this correlation actually makes sense, right? So if we're looking at the demand for ketchup, and when the price for fries goes down, then fries becomes more attractive, and the ketchup will become more attractive as well. So when people are consuming more ketchup, the demand curve for ketchup will actually shift towards the right. Does that make sense? So if at any point that you might feel a little bit confused, please feel free to shoot me an email or send me a text and I'll respond as soon as possible, right? So for timing purposes, I will move on. For income, we consider two different scenarios. So the first being inferior good. So if my income rises, the demand for inferior goods will then shift towards the left. And the intuition behind this is that as you become wealthier, you will consume less inferior goods, like fast food. Of course, you can argue that Bill Gates or other millionaires might also love McDonald's and instant noodles, but we're considering general behaviors. It is kind of impossible for one single economic model to represent all the individual situations. Maybe 80% or 90% are accurate, but definitely not 100%, right? Just something that you want to keep in mind. So for normal good, the relationship is completely the opposite. So if my income rises, I will be more likely to consume normal goods like luxury and healthy organic food. So income increases, that means my demand curve for normal goods increases. But something very important is that when my income rises, it doesn't mean that my demand curve will definitely shift to the right. So it depends on the good that we're looking at here. Depending on whether the good is normal or inferior, we can determine the direction of the shift of the curve. Next, fashion or taste. So if my taste for a certain good increases, the demand will definitely increase as a result for sure. And this is pretty straightforward. I guess one of my favorite examples is Wechat. It is one of the most popular bubble tea places in China. So you can always see a huge line in front of the store when it first came out. And it is definitely the taste or the fashion that contribute to the increasing demand. Well, to me, it's kind of stupid and I don't really understand, but oh well. Anyways, so for interest rate, an interest rate is the percentage of principal charged by a lender for the use of its money. So when you borrow the money, the bank will usually charge you an interest rate on the money they lend out. So if interest goes up, it means that it will be more expensive for you to borrow, and therefore the demand will shift to the left. So to wrap up, any change in non-price variables, as we have already introduced, will result in a shift in the entire demand curve. This is called a change in demand. And any change in price will then lead to a change in quantity demanded. So next time, I will show you the difference on the graph. So thank you so much for staying, and I hope to see you next time.